They tore out my vineyard while I was inside making coffee. One of the guys even laughed, said the HOA told them it was just old landscaping. I didn't scream, I didn't argue, I just walked back inside and locked the door. I bought this place 2 years ago, kinda on a whim, but not really. My dad passed the year before, and I guess I wasn't handling the city too well after that. Everything felt loud, disconnected. So when I found this old stone cottage at the edge of Elmridge, just past the tree line, past where the streetlights stop, I jumped on it, cheap, kinda falling apart, but with bones, and peace, way more peace than I'd had in a long time. The land came with a garden that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, but right in the middle was this little vineyard, 5 neat rows of old stubborn grapevines, tangled but alive. The old man who lived here before me, a World War II vet named Mr. Weatherby, had planted them back in the 50s. I met his son when I was buying the place. He told me his dad used to sit out there every morning with his coffee and check every single vine like he was inspecting soldiers. His words, not mine. They used to bottle wine here in the 70s apparently, not for sale, just for family. His dad even buried a bottle from the last harvest under the main post of the center row. Said it was for whoever's next. I'm not gonna lie, that stuck with me. So when I moved in, I made it my mission to bring that vineyard back. Even while I was patching roof leaks and rebuilding the front porch, I always made time to tend those vines. Cut them back, fed the soil, even built a little trellis wall out of salvaged wood. It was my peace. I don't pray, but that place felt sacred to me. And before anyone gets it twisted, I'm not in the HOA, never was. The property's technically just outside the Elmridge village line. It's on its own deed, with a stone wall that marks the border. Mr. Weatherby made sure of that when the development popped up in the early 2000s. He didn't want anything to do with their lawn uniformity cult, as he put it. I figured same, I keep to myself. I work from home, I restore antique furniture for a living. Quiet, dusty, my ideal. So when the HOA folks showed up with a welcome packet and a smile 6 months after I moved in, I just politely told them no thanks. That's when the weirdness started. The first real crack showed up about a month after I turned down their little community packet. I came home from the hardware store and saw a fluorescent orange tag zip-tied to my mailbox post. Not my actual mailbox, the post. The tag said something about a courtesy citation for non-compliant yard elements visible from the public right-of-way. Whatever the hell that meant. I looked around, confused. My trash bins were in. Lawn was mowed. Then I saw it. They had circled unauthorized structures. And they had taped a little photo printout of my trellis wall, the one I'd built for the grapevines. I remember just standing there holding that dumb piece of paper, trying to process how someone could be offended by wood slats and vines that don't even face the street. That night, I emailed the address on the tag. Just to be clear, got a response from someone named Brenda Langford, said she was president of the Elmridge Village Homeowners Association, and she'd be happy to walk me through the guidelines to get my property in better harmony with the community aesthetic. I replied again, saying I'm not part of Elmridge Village, never signed anything. My land's on its own plat. She responded in less than 10 minutes. Same email thread. Said, that's a common misunderstanding. According to our updated boundaries and latest vote, your property now falls under community oversight as of March 1st. All guidelines apply retroactively. Retroactively, like I owed her HOA fees for years I never agreed to. I didn't answer that email. I called the city office the next day. A guy named Richard in planning told me there was no formal record of any boundary changes, and if there were, I would have received official notice in the mail. Spoiler, I hadn't. But guess who showed up at my door 2 days later with a clipboard and a smile? Brenda Langford, late 50s, hair that looked like it hadn't moved since the Reagan administration. Blue blazer, pearls, that kind of person. She told me, direct quote, "We're simply trying to help you integrate more smoothly into the visual ecosystem of Elmridge." Visual ecosystem, like my grapevines were an invasive species. I told her calmly, very calmly, that my land is outside her jurisdiction and has been for over a century. She just smiled and said, well, that might technically be true for now, but we've been working with the town council to correct some historical irregularities. Historical irregularities. That's what she called a deed that predates Elmridge by 98 years. I didn't slam the door on her, but I really wanted to. Instead, I said, I like my vines. I'll keep the trellis, please don't contact me again unless it's through a lawyer. She gave me a weird smile, like I was a child saying something silly. Oh, we'll be in touch. And buddy, she wasn't kidding. It started small. A few more of those little orange tags every couple weeks, always worded like suggestions, but stapled to things on my property like they owned the damn place. First it was the vines, then it was the shutters, which I had literally just restored by hand. Non-standard color, they said, even though they were the original shade from the 1930s, matched from a sample I stripped off the sill. I called the city again. Same guy, Richard, started sounding nervous, said he was looking into it. Told me Brenda had submitted a petition to formally annex unmanaged legacy parcels into Elmridge Village for the sake of visual continuity and community cohesion. I asked what the hell that meant. He said the council hadn't voted yet. Hadn't. Yet. I figured, okay, I've got time. I printed out my deed, framed it on the wall, and went back to working in the shop. Until the community newsletter showed up. 4 glossy pages, folded nice, shoved through my mail slot like it belonged there. On the front, a bright little photo of my house, with the caption, "New additions to the Elmridge family. Welcome Jordan Feldman to our growing vision." The whole inside was full of plans, sketches, color-coded maps showing improvements and shared space extensions. They had drawn my back garden, my vines, as a future community reflection garden. I'm not even kidding. They labeled my grape trellis as a proposed gazebo site. And right there, in fake cursive, was a quote from Brenda. "When we welcome a new home into our family, we elevate it, not just visually, but spiritually." I nearly threw up. But nothing, not the tags, not the email threats, not even that glossy newsletter came close to what happened on the second Saturday in June. I was on a video call with a client showing him the inlay work on a Queen Anne dresser I'd been restoring. I stepped out back for a second, just for air, and that's when I saw them. 5 people on my land. 2 were marking off rows with fluorescent tape. 1 was holding a clipboard. 1 was digging. And the 5th, some teenage kid in a HOA intern t-shirt, was dragging my vines out of the ground. Roots and all, piling them like garbage. I lost my voice before I could even shout. When I finally got something out, it was just, "What the hell are you doing?" The kid looked up, startled. "Oh, Mrs. Langford said this was getting cleared for the reflection space. I thought you were notified?" He said it like I was the weird one, like I was interrupting their day. I ran over. I didn't touch anybody, I'm not stupid, but I stood right between them and the last 2 standing vines. I told them this was private land and they were trespassing, that they needed to leave. Right now. The one with the clipboard, some guy in a pastel polo with a Bluetooth earpiece, gave me this smirk. "Sir, this is part of Elmridge's Public Enhancement Initiative. It's already been approved." I told him no. I told him I never approved anything, never signed anything, and this vineyard is over 100 years old. He said, "We didn't see any permits for agricultural use on file." I swear to God, that's what he said. Permits for agricultural use. I told them again to get off my land. That time, they left. Slowly. One of them called Brenda as they walked. I heard the name. I spent the next 2 hours walking up and down the rows trying to save whatever I could. Some vines were mangled, a few completely snapped. They'd cut through the main root cluster on the oldest row, the same one with the bottle buried under it. I dug through the soil for over an hour, never found it. That broke me a little. I sat in the dirt until sundown. I didn't cry, but I felt something in me calcify. I told myself I'd fix it, that I'd replant, that I'd fight this through the city, through logic, through process. But what I didn't realize then was that logic was the one thing Brenda Langford didn't believe in. She was already 5 moves ahead. First thing Monday morning, I went down to City Hall with a folder full of documents and a photo of my vines torn out of the ground. I figured, okay, maybe this is just a mistake. A really aggressive, tone-deaf, HOA-style misunderstanding. Maybe if I just showed them my deed, the city would step in. Spoiler, they didn't. I waited in line for almost an hour just to talk to someone from planning. Not even a lawyer, just a guy named Rick in a wrinkled button-down who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I told him what happened, showed him the photos, the survey lines, the damage. He nodded like he cared, but I could see the moment his brain switched to neutral. Said he'd escalate the issue to the Zoning Review Committee and gave me a yellow form to file an incident report for unauthorized landscaping activity. Landscaping. They destroyed century-old vines and called it unauthorized landscaping. I tried again, this time with the town's Heritage Preservation Board. A woman named Carla answered the phone and actually sounded concerned for about 30 seconds, until she looked up the parcel and said, "Oh, you're that house next to Elmridge Village? I think that area is under pending designation." I asked what that meant. She said, "Brenda Langford submitted an annexation request and historical site nomination for the community reflection space last month. That includes your lot." I told her that wasn't her community, that was my land. Carla said, "If there's a conflict of claims, you'll need to take it up with the registrar's office or file a private motion." Then she apologized, like a customer service rep reading from a script, and hung up. I tried mailing a formal cease and desist to the HOA's P.O. box, just in case that mattered. Certified mail. Brenda signed for it personally. I tracked the signature. Next week, I got a hand-delivered envelope taped to my door. Inside was a letter on HOA letterhead, printed on thick cream paper like it was an invitation to a wedding or something. It said, "Dear Mr. Feldman, thank you for your recent communication. As you are now part of the Elmridge Village community, pending formal approval, we will consider your concerns at the next board meeting. In the meantime, any structures or landscaping not in line with our community guidelines will be subject to modification for the greater aesthetic and spiritual cohesion of the neighborhood. Sincerely, Brenda Langford, President, Elmridge Village HOA." They weren't backing off. They were doubling down. They were saying with corporate politeness, "We own you now. Deal with it." And the next part really sealed it. 2 days later, I caught one of my neighbors, I'm not going to say his name, but the guy lives 2 doors down, out front of my place, giving what I swear was a walking tour to some out-of-towners. They stood at the edge of my stone wall, and I heard him say, "This space will eventually be a shared meditation lawn with grapevines and a water feature. It used to be kind of a mess, but Brenda's transforming it." He saw me standing there on the porch, waved like nothing was weird. I didn't wave back. That night, I sat in the shop with a bottle of whiskey and the original hand-drawn plat map Mr. Weatherby had framed in his living room. I traced the property lines with my thumb. They hadn't changed in 100 years. And yet somehow this HOA thought they could just manifest jurisdiction by printing enough pamphlets and lying to enough people. I wasn't the fighting type, never had been. But something about the way Brenda kept smiling, like this was inevitable, started to shift something in me. They'd taken my vines, ignored every legal document I sent, twisted every attempt I made to talk like a human being. So I stopped trying to talk. And I started digging. So I went back to what I know best. See, I used to be an engineer before I got into furniture. I'm not talking spreadsheets and cubicles. I was the kind of guy they sent into old buildings to figure out how to fix what nobody else understood. I'd study floor plans, permits, load-bearing walls, anything with layers. I liked figuring out what was real underneath all the surface noise. So I thought, what if I treated this like one of those buildings? What if there was something buried under the nonsense that could explain why Brenda was pushing so hard? I started with the county land archives. Took me 3 hours just to get access to the right terminal, but once I did, I went deep. Parcel records, zoning documents, old annexation requests, anything with my lot number, most of it lined up with what I already knew. Weatherby bought the land in 58, plat line was recorded in 59, and it had never been touched by city reassessment or annexation. Crystal clear. But then I found something weird. There was a scanned document from 2006 buried under an unfiled Hodge review pending category. It was a proposal from Elmridge Village's developer, some firm called Stratton Ridge LLC, to expand the subdivision boundaries and convert 3 adjacent parcels, including mine, into what they called Phase 4 public amenities. It was never approved, stamped, rejected in red across the top, but right underneath that rejection was an internal city memo. Request denied due to historic value of lot number 143B. Property remains on the provisional watch list per Historical Review Committee recommendation, pending formal evaluation for registry consideration. Historic value. I didn't even know what that meant. My place wasn't on any tourist map. No plaques. Just me, the vines, and some stone walls. So I followed that breadcrumb. Went back to the Historical Commission. This time, I didn't call. I showed up in person, unannounced. Talked to an older guy named Davis, wore suspenders, smelled like pipe smoke. Total archivist energy. He pulled up a case file labeled Weatherby Vineyard, unofficial. Turns out, Mr. Weatherby didn't just grow grapes for fun. He used to run a community wine co-op in the late 60s through the mid-70s. The vineyard was tiny, but it was one of only 4 independent winemaking spots left in the entire county when the state restructured the alcohol laws. He was basically grandfathered in under the old regulations. Never commercial, but historically recognized. Even crazier, that vineyard, my vineyard, was the subject of a petition submitted in 2005 to be declared a site of local agricultural heritage. It never went through because Weatherby refused to open the land to visitors. He didn't want tourists on his porch. But the paperwork? It's still active, still valid. And here's the kicker. The Elmridge HOA clubhouse, their main office, it's built partially on the original land parcel line of my lot. See, back in 2002, when Elmridge was just breaking ground, they shifted the road layout from the original blueprint to make space for more homes. I guess they figured no one would care about an old fence line, but the HOA parking lot and half the clubhouse patio? They're technically built across the stone wall, on my side, the wall I still maintain. I sat there staring at the plat overlay Davis had printed out for me, and I swear I could feel my pulse in my teeth. They weren't just trying to annex me, they'd already trespassed for years, and nobody caught it. But Brenda knew. She had to. No one fights this hard over vines and trellises unless they're hiding something way bigger. And I was just getting started. Because Davis also gave me one more document, something he thought I might find emotionally relevant. It was a letter, handwritten, from 2004, folded into the file like a bookmark. It was from my dad. He'd written it to Weatherby after visiting the house before I ever bought it. They were old friends, apparently, I never even knew. Eli, you've built something rare here. The Vineyard's not just beautiful, it's alive. It's peace and quiet and defiance in a world full of noise. If you ever decide to pass it on, I hope you'll offer it to someone who understands that. Someone who won't pave it over for tennis courts. With respect, David Feldman. I sat in my truck for a long time after that, just reading those words over and over again. That vineyard, it wasn't just my piece, it was my dad's too. He never told me. Maybe he didn't want to push me toward it. Maybe he thought I'd find it on my own. And now these HOA parasites were trying to wipe it off the map so they could install yoga mats and call it a legacy. They tore out my vines. But I was holding the blueprint for burning down their entire lie. Figuratively, of course, for now. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept the letter from my dad in my pocket like a pocket knife. Just knowing it was there made me feel sharper, more focused. I wasn't mad anymore, not in that punch-a-wall kind of way. I was past that. I was surgical, calm. This wasn't about revenge. It was about removal. I wanted Brenda Langford and her HOA off my back and off my land, permanently, and I was gonna do it clean. Step 1 was proof. Not just the historical stuff. I had that. I needed recent, irrefutable evidence of their trespassing. Not maybe the boundary is blurry stuff. Evidence that screamed in legalese. So I called an old friend of mine from my engineering days, Laura Epps. She's a licensed surveyor now, runs her own firm 2 counties over. Precision work, zero tolerance for BS. I emailed her the maps, photos, satellite overlays. She called me back the same afternoon and said, "Jordan, if what you're showing me is accurate, they've been sitting on your parcel like squatters." She came out that Friday, full setup, tripods, GPS markers, laser rangefinder. Looked like she was prepping for a lunar landing. By Saturday evening, I had an official, notarized, GPS-validated boundary survey. It clearly showed the HOA clubhouse encroaching 15 feet onto my land. The patio, the retaining wall, part of their little "Welcome to Elmbridge" sign, all of it inside my deeded property line. No room for doubt, no community misunderstanding. Laura also flagged something else. Apparently, the HOA's new irrigation lines, installed last year, ran directly across my back tree line. Unauthorized water diversion. That's a code violation. I now had evidence of trespassing, land encroachment, structural intrusion, and utility violation. But I wasn't done. I took all that and I called a lawyer, Monica Reyes. Not cheap, not local, and exactly what I needed. Monica specializes in land rights and historical preservation disputes. I picked her because she doesn't blink when people mention HOAs. In fact, she kinda grins. I told her everything, showed her the documents, the photos of my torn up vines, the newsletter with the reflection garden, the new survey, the memo from the city archives, the letter from my dad. She leaned back in her chair, tapped her pen on the desk, and said, "This is a land grab, a messy one, but you've got the high ground, morally and legally." Then she laid out my plan. Cease and desist, official letter to Brenda and the HOA citing trespass, structural encroachment, and misrepresentation of jurisdiction. Include the survey, the memo, and a threat of injunction. Injunction filing, immediate motion with the court to stop any further HOA activity touching my land, including flyers, physical entry, or public claims. While the court processed that, she'd prep for the nuclear option, historic site filing. Use Davis's file and the archived petition to officially reopen the historic site application. Once submitted, it would trigger a review from the state board and freeze any development on or around the Vineyard area, including theirs. Media pressure. Monica had a contact at the county's biggest news blog, said they love HOA drama, especially when it involves preservation versus gentrification. We'd leak the story, the photos, the quote about spiritual cohesion, and that ridiculous map turning my land into a gazebo park. Restitution demand. Final step. File civil suit for destruction of property, misrepresentation, and trespass. Not because I expected a payout, but because Brenda needed to feel it in her wallet. But the best part? Monica had noticed something in the HOA's own charter, their legal foundation, the thing that gave them their tiny throne. It clearly stated that Elmridge Village boundaries were fixed and non-expandable unless all affected property owners consented in writing. Guess who never signed anything? So technically, not only was I not in the HOA, every single vote Brenda held about my land, every meeting, every newsletter, every public initiative was a violation of their own bylaws. Monica looked at me and said, "We're not just going to shut them down on your land, we're going to pull out the roots." I smiled for the first time in weeks, a real one. Then I asked, "When do we start?" She grinned. Already did. The cease and desist letter went out on Monday. Brenda signed for it on Tuesday. By Wednesday, she was knocking on my door. Now I knew better than to answer. I watched her through the side window. She stood there in that same tailored navy blazer, clutching her clipboard like a holy book, lips pursed so tight you'd think she'd tasted vinegar. She knocked again, then again, harder. Finally, she turned to leave, but not before pulling a glossy HOA pamphlet from her tote bag and sliding it through my door slot like a threat. The cover said, "Preserving Harmony in Elmridge, the Garden Vision continues." It had my backyard on the cover, still. I handed that to Monica, she just added it to the file, no words needed. That Friday, we filed the injunction. Next came the real fun. Monica's media contact? Guy named Taylor Shin. He ran a blog called Civic Watch, but don't let the title fool you. It was practically TMZ for municipal drama. We gave him everything. The historic Vineyard photos, the before and after shots of my vines, the HOA map turning my land into a public lawn, the email where Brenda claimed I was already integrated, the city memo from 2006, and the full boundary survey showing her patio squatting on my property like a smug stone parasite. The post went up Saturday morning. By noon, it had 18,000 views. By dinner, it had 44,000 and was on the local subreddit, the town Facebook group, and someone had even reposted it to Nextdoor with the caption, "HOA tries to steal Vineyard, gets smacked with 100 years of karma." Comments blew up. People from my own neighborhood, some who hadn't made eye contact with me in months, started stopping by. Quiet at first, a wave, then a, "Hey, I didn't know all that was going on." Then one guy dropped off a little bottle of homemade wine, no label, just a post-it that said, "To the vines." It was working, but we weren't done. That Monday, Monica filed a second motion. This one was beautiful. A formal petition for protective designation status on the vineyard, with historical significance and boundary clarification attached. That triggered a review hearing, automatically freezing any HOA construction or landscaping within 100 feet of the disputed property. And since the HOA's irrigation system ran right through that area, boom, their sprinklers got shut off. They started browning faster than Brenda's reputation. But here's where it really got good. We sent a certified letter to the HOA board, addressed not just to Brenda, but to every sitting member. Inside, a copy of the original HOA charter, highlighting the non-expandable clause, a highlighted city record showing my lot's independence, a legal notice that any further claims, flyers, trespasses, or use of my property name in promotional material would result in direct legal action, not against Elmridge Village, but against them individually. Derek, their treasurer, was the first to fold, sent Monica an email 2 days later saying he was unaware of the boundary situation and would refrain from further involvement pending legal clarification. By the end of the week, 2 more board members resigned. They weren't going to go down with Brenda. She was still smiling in public, of course, showing up at yoga events, organizing trash pickup days like nothing was wrong, but you could see it in her eyes. She was cornered. That Friday, I took a little walk past the clubhouse. I stayed on the public sidewalk, didn't say a word, but I saw her out front, arguing with 2 contractors while gesturing toward the patio. They were shaking their heads, pointing at a printed map I couldn't see. One of them threw up his hands like, "Not our problem, lady." Then they packed up and drove off. The next morning, Monica forwarded me an email. It was from the Elmridge HOA general inbox. The subject line was, "Request for mediation." Brenda was officially asking if we'd consider a compromise. I laughed, out loud. They tore my vines out of the ground, tried to annex my land, turned my sanctuary into brochure filler. And now that the lawsuits, the survey, the historic review board, and the public were turning on her, now she wanted compromise? Monica asked how I wanted to respond. I told her, politely decline, and let her know we're preparing a separate motion for restitution damages. But the best part was the day the city zoning inspector came out with a tape measure and a clipboard of her own. Brenda stood on the clubhouse patio, arms crossed, and watched as the inspector marked off every inch of encroachment. Then she posted a bright red sign on the retaining wall. Unauthorized structure, under investigation, do not alter or use. Brenda turned white. And I went home, clipped one of the surviving vine cuttings I'd rooted in a pot, and replanted it right where the old center row used to stand, right where the bottle had been. The roots were shallow, but it was growing. You ever watch someone lose power in real time? Not with screaming or fireworks, but slowly, publicly, like a sandcastle sinking into the tide. That's what it looked like the night of the Elmridge Town Hall meeting. I wasn't even planning to go at first. I figured the court filings, injunction, and press coverage had already done the damage. But Monica insisted, said it would be strategically meaningful if I made an appearance. So I showed up. Button-down shirt, clean jeans, nothing fancy. Just me and a flash drive. The meeting was held at the community center gym, folding chairs and bad coffee. The place was packed, standing room only, not just HOA people. I saw shop owners, neighbors, even a few city officials leaning against the back wall. Brenda was already up front, seated at the long table with the other remaining board members. Well, the ones who hadn't jumped ship yet. She had her pearls on, posture ramrod straight, and that same frozen smile expression like she couldn't quite believe she still had to explain herself to mere mortals. They opened the floor for public comment. I waited. Third person up was a woman who lived 2 streets over. She walked to the mic and calmly asked, "Why is my HOA dues money being spent on legal fees for land that doesn't belong to us?" Brenda's smile twitched. The fourth person was even better, a retired teacher who flat out asked if Brenda had forged expansion documents or just failed to read the bylaws she's been quoting for years. Then someone brought up the irrigation system, how they'd paid to install it, and now it was shut down because it crossed onto private property. 10 minutes in, and Brenda was already bleeding credibility. That's when Monica stood up. She didn't say much, just introduced herself as my legal representative and requested permission to present a short timeline of events relevant to public concern. They gave her the projector, and friend, she unloaded. She showed the original deed, the boundary lines, the survey overlay, the Welcome to Elmridge sign sitting 3 feet over my stone wall, photos of the destroyed vines, annotated, a copy of the HOA's own charter highlighting the non-expandable clause in bold. And finally, she played audio from a voicemail Brenda left on a contractor's line, accidentally forwarded to us during discovery. In it, she says, "Don't worry about the permit, just call it a community enhancement. If he pushes back, we'll wrap it in spirituality or some crap. The council eats that stuff up." You could feel the air get sucked out of the room. Someone in the back muttered, "Jesus." Brenda stood up and tried to interrupt, claimed the voicemail was taken out of context. Monica smiled like a cat that just tipped over a wine glass and clicked to the final slide, a screenshot of Brenda's personal email. The subject line, "Drafting Community Harmony Expansion Language," with Jordan's Yard. At that point, the mayor, who up until then had been pretending to sip coffee and not get involved, leaned into his mic and said, "We're going to need a formal investigation into HOA conduct and resource misuse, effective immediately." Brenda sat down, hard. The next speaker was Taylor, the blogger who'd broken the story. He asked if the city would consider reviewing the HOA's charter for potential decertification due to patterned abuse of authority. And you know what? They said yes. They actually said yes. It would take time, of course, committees, legal review, but Brenda Langford's empire, it was already collapsing under its own weight. 3 days later, I walked past the clubhouse again. This time, the unauthorized structure sign had been joined by a second one. Facility closed pending review by City Planning Department. The gates were chained. We weren't done. Monica still had depositions to prep and the state board was reviewing our historical site petition. But the battle, the one that started with a ripped up grapevine, that part was over. And let me tell you, seeing Brenda walk out of that meeting face blank, clipboard nowhere in sight, that was better than any fine, ruling, or payout. Because it wasn't just about me. Everyone saw it. No edits, no spin. Just the truth, up on a screen, with Brenda Langford caught in the middle of her own web. The vines are coming back. Not fast, not like in a movie. They're slow, quiet. I replanted most from cuttings, what I could salvage from the mess they left behind. The roots are still fragile, but they're holding. Every week I walk the rows with my coffee like Mr. Weatherby used to, just checking, watering, waiting. A couple of neighbors started stopping by. Not the HOA ones, those people mostly keep their heads down now, but the real neighbors, old-timers. A young couple with a kid who asked if she could help water. Even the guy from 2 doors down who gave the tour finally came over and apologized. Brought peach preserves. I didn't ask questions, just said thanks. I never got the bottle back. The one Mr. Weatherby buried under the center row. I dug for days. Nothing. But then last week, I found something else. While I was resetting the last post on the middle row, I hit something hard under the soil, flat and heavy. Brushed it off. It was a stone, carved, weather-worn. Looked like it had been there for decades. One word on it: stay. I have no idea who put it there. Maybe Eli, maybe my dad, maybe just someone who understood what this land meant long before I ever showed up. I cleaned it off and left it where it was, half buried, under the vines. As for the HOA, Brenda's no longer president. She resigned to spend more time with her family. The clubhouse is still closed. The irrigation system's been ripped out. There's talk about dissolving the board altogether, but I don't really follow the updates anymore. Monica keeps me in the loop when it matters. The Vineyard's officially on the preservation watch list now. Won't be long before it's protected for good. Funny thing, now people treat it with respect. They speak quieter near the wall. No more flyers, no more tours, just space, just silence, just mine. A few weeks ago, I made a little sign, burned into reclaimed cedar from the old trellis. I mounted it at the gate right where you step into the garden. It says, "Private land, not for sale. Vines don't forget." And below that, in smaller letters, "Established 1954, Weatherby Co-op, reclaimed 2023. It's not about revenge, not anymore. It's about roots, and making damn sure no one tries to rip them up again.